Hello, and welcome to Rough Edges. I'm your host, Sarah Fox. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create a voice for those who wish to discover more about these topics. This podcast will not only shed light on mental health issues, but will also reveal the intersection between faith and mental illness. I pray that these themes will bring growth and healing to our communities. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. Today, I am here with special guest Elizabeth Horner. Elizabeth is a psychiatric nurse. She worked for an inpatient psychiatric hospital on a floor for adult patients dealing mainly with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, or other psychotic and mood disorders. She recently began working for a school that works with children who have a variety of physical and mental disabilities, including those with psychiatric conditions. She's been living with bipolar disorder for about 20 years. Although she started having some symptoms even in high school. However, since that time, she's graduated nursing school, gotten married, and started a family. So even though it's not easy, having a mostly stable, happy life is achievable. Hello, Elizabeth. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello. Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here.
Amazing. So, Elizabeth, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What are 3 comfort foods that you enjoy most?
Oh my gosh. Well, chocolate cake, I've got to say, would probably be definitely a no-brainer at the top of the list. Any kind of English pastry with a cup of coffee, I think is just perfect. And of course, pasta. That's the quintessential comfort food, and it is for me as well.
Nice. So, can you tell me a little bit more about your experience with bipolar disorder?
Sure. Yeah, I was, as you mentioned, I was diagnosed about 20 years ago. Although I had, been having symptoms for about 3 to 4 years prior to that when I was in high school. And it was a very self-destructive time in my life. I had zero insight or understanding as to what was happening to me. And eventually what caused me to seek help was a crippling depression. I ended up going to my father and told him that I just felt hopeless and wanted to die. And he's the one who got the number of a psychiatrist for me. And when I went to the psychiatrist, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I think at the time I only kind of partly heard what he said. The depression was so miserable, and I was willing to take medication just to kind of escape that, but I didn't really pay attention to what that actually meant, living with bipolar disorder. But I did take the medicine, and I managed to find, a level of stability. I went to nursing school, got married, had children. But the whole time I was still living in the semi-denial of my condition, if that makes sense. And it wasn't really until I started working at the psychiatric hospital that I felt like I was staring my condition in the face. I was no longer able to minimize it or deny it. It kind of was the turning point. I really started to take accountability for my behavior and my health. I decided to try lithium, which I had been avoiding for so many years, just because there was such a stigma attached to it. And I felt like taking lithium meant that, okay, I was basically admitting, yes, okay, I have this condition. Mm-hmm. But it did bring me another level of stability that I didn't have before. So once I kind of found my stride, I started advocating for mental health, writing about it, doing speaking at podcasts, doing conventions, and I'm here today.
Nice. I really love your story and how you were able to find some semblance of stability in your life. And I know that had to take a level of resilience. And so I want to know, what does the word resilience mean to you?
I feel like there's this idea that in order to be resilient. Things always have to kind of fall back into place, or that they always have to kind of look the way they looked before whatever crisis it was that led to things to be a mess in the first place. But the reality is that resilience is messy. You know, it's the ability to kind of get back up, keep rising up, and to keep putting yourself back into the ring, and to keep fighting to get back on your feet. And every time after an episode, you know, I'm forced to put the pieces of my life back together again, and it's not a comfortable process. It can be demoralizing, it can be embarrassing. However, you know, it has to be done to kind of move forward with my life. So being resilient is just showing up again and again.
Yeah, that's really good. And so you are a mother, and I would like to know, how do you balance motherhood with managing your mental health?
Truthfully, that's a question I'm still learning how to answer. You know, the one thing that I have learned is that you've got to prioritize yourself as much as you are the other members of your family. You know, it takes a level of kind of dedication and time to keep up with psychiatrist appointments, with therapist appointments. And it would be easy to just kind of say, oh, well, my kids have soccer practice, or they have this and that they've got to do. And to let those appointments kind of slip by, and you just cannot do that. You've got to care for yourself. You know, for example, like for soccer, for example, when I made it was the worst decision of my life. I put all 4 boys in at the same time into the soccer season, and I ended up becoming completely overwhelmed, and had to pull the littlest one off the team. And it was just because, you know, I put too much on my plate, and you kind of have to be able to realistically assess what you're able to do and what your limitations are. So, you know, kind of constantly having to remind myself of that.
Yes, I agree. Prioritizing self-care is very important. And it's not selfish, you know? It's not, you know, like self-indulgent to care for yourself, you know? Especially as a mother, when you can't give from an empty cup. You can't give from an empty place. So, you know, being able to pour out that care and that nurturing nature that you have as a mother, it all comes back to prioritizing your self-care. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, that's exactly it.
Yeah, so you kind of hinted on this a little bit, but what would you say is the most challenging aspect of being a mother and having mental illness?
You know, it's seeing the pain that it has caused in my kid's life. You know, my biggest motivator for staying on track is that I want to show up in a way that is consistent and loving for my kids, so that they feel seen and heard. And I can't do that if I'm having an episode. And it's crushing to see your kids hurting and know that you are the cause of it. So you know, having to apologize to your children because you haven't been able to be there for them in the way that you've wanted to be there, you know, over the past few weeks or a few days, or, you know, whatever is it, you know, however length of time it is a painful process. You know, I'm lucky my kids are so forgiving, you know, and I've practiced kind of modeling. Hopefully what I'm doing is modeling what an apology looks like, because I want to let them know, like, I see that I've caused you pain, and you know, I don't want it just to be swept under the rug.
Yeah, and that must be hard, you know, dealing with all the shame and regret that comes with having an episode, because when I had a manic episode, like, last year in January, and just seeing, like, how it affects my family dynamic, as well as, like, my little sister, like, she saw me having my episode, and you know, how it affected her and, you know, the way that she views the world now. So I would just like to know, how do you deal with the shame and regret that comes from having an episode?
I, it's a process. You know, I'm still discovering that. I'm still going through it. It just naturally follows an episode, and I still have to work through it every single time. You know, for example, I had a depressive episode recently, and every time that process of putting the pieces back together again is kind of gut wrenching. You know, I did have a friend recently who pointed out to me, and this was such, I thought, a beautiful way to look at it. But I can't remember what culture it is, and where if a piece of pottery breaks, for example, they put it back together again, but they do it using this like gold substance that, you know, so you can see like the gold lines that were the cracks, and it makes it even more beautiful. And so I kind of try to keep that in mind when I'm going through that process. Like, doesn't have to be a source of shame and humiliation. That there's beauty in the putting things back together again and moving forward and creating healing from that point on.
I love that. I especially love the culture. I believe it was Japanese culture. I don't even know what the thing is called, but those pieces where, you know, it's put back together with, as you said, the gold. Like, that is just a beautiful remnant of just restoration and the power of, like, having beauty, like creating beauty from a broken place. Like, and that's essentially what we're doing in terms of, like, you know, with mental health advocacy. And so getting into your career as a psychiatric nurse, what inspired you to become a psychiatric nurse?
You know, while I was going through my episodes, it was such a lonely place. And I think what attracted me to nursing is that there was something about reaching out and being with someone when they're in that emptiness or in that emotional space that really is called to me. You know, I wanted people to know that they are not alone. Because when I was going through it, you know, as a teenager and in my early 20s, there was nobody. I had no support whatsoever. I mean, nobody even really acknowledged anything. They just assumed I was on drugs at first. And that was really painful. It's like, does nobody see, like, I needed help, and there was not a single hand out there or kind word to help me. And so if I can give back to people what I never had, then that to me is, you know, that's why I chose psychiatric nursing.
Wow. And it's so amazing that you gave from a place of, like, not having that support system, because I can only imagine what you went through without having at least somebody to bring you through that, you know, and walk alongside you. So what would you say is the most rewarding aspect of your job?
I guess being present for people who are struggling, and to let them know that there's more to them than their illness. You know, whether you're high or you're low, you know, it matters to have someone see you for who you really are. That can go a long way towards someone's recovery. You know, just imagine someone who knows you at your core, who has seen you go through manic phases or depressive phases, and it doesn't, like, change their opinion of you, you know, because they know you, they know who you are, like, who your essence is. And so that's kind of, that's what I would say.
I agree with you about, you know, people sticking by you in terms of, like, knowing who you are as a person and not allowing that stigma to kind of rule how they view their perspective of you. So exactly. That's very important. So speaking of stigma, if you could change one thing about the stigma surrounding mental health, what would it be?
I have this thing about this whole reduce the stigma and let's raise awareness kick that so many people are on these days. For one, I feel like it's very hip and very in to be on that mental health awareness train. And most people talk about depression and anxiety, which are debilitating, but we all have anxiety. We all have, sadness in us. We can all relate to that somehow. Mm-hmm. But the second somebody mentions schizoaffective or schizophrenia or bipolar, it goes quiet. Nobody knows what to say. And it's like, yeah, people will say, yeah, I've been dealing with a lot of anxiety lately, and they get tons of support. But the second, but if someone were to say, the voices have been really bothersome for me today, mm-hmm. Nobody knows how to handle that. And I want to bring that level of mental health, up into the spotlight more. So yeah, I think it's great that we've made the progress we've made, and we're beginning to normalize the conversation, just like you and I are talking about it. But we have so much further to go before we get anywhere near reducing the stigma around serious mental illness, major depressive disorders or suicide. That whole arena. We've got a long way to go.
I agree with you. We definitely do have a long way to go. And what you said was so true. It's we take the more, for lack of a better word, mainstream mental illnesses like depression and anxiety, and we kind of give it a little bit of a pass and say, oh, we give extra support to that. But mm-hmm. when it comes to bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or PTSD even, we just... like you said, we go quiet and we just don't know what to say. We don't know how to support, and we don't know the right words to, formulate a compassionate response. So right. I agree. We definitely have a lot more, but I believe that we can get to a point where these topics are normalized and that we can go into society and be a little bit more compassionate towards people who have serious mental illnesses.
Yes, that's my goal. I definitely want to see us get there.
Yeah. And so what advice or words of encouragement do you have for those who are struggling to manage bipolar disorder?
I guess I want people who are managing bipolar disorder to understand that a fulfilling life is possible. But self-awareness and insight is a element to achieving this. It takes work. You work with a therapist, find a doctor you trust to help you manage the medication component, and develop friendships that will build you up and have a positive influence on your life. I had that I recently recovered from a major depressive episode, and it was one of the worst I had had in quite a while. And I work with a therapist who saw it coming, and she had kind of given me a few nudges and warned me a few times, which, obviously at the time I didn't heed her warning that I was doing too much, and she could see this episode coming on. But the point is that there was a reliable person there who was there to see what was happening in the first place and help me get through it to reach the other side. So you've got to put your team in order, and do the work, and develop that self-awareness. But you can do it. Anyone can have a perfectly happy and fulfilling life as having bipolar disorder. It shouldn't stop you or define you. You can accomplish anything you want to.
And you are living proof of that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am. It's if you had told me when I was, 20 that I would be where I am today, back, when things were so unstable for me, I wouldn't have believed you. But now that I'm here, I can say, no, it's possible. And the more people that get past that point and reach that level of stability, hopefully we can all encourage each other.
Well, I'm definitely inspired by you and your journey. Like, it's incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my final question, I know that you are a mental health advocate, and so I would like to ask, what does mental health advocacy mean to you?
Being an advocate is really putting yourself out there and being a voice for people who don't have the ability to speak for themselves, perhaps at that moment. You've really got to get down, get dirty, be willing to get your, hands in the dirt or whatever the expression is, and reach people who are in that place. And it can be like, for me, writing is kind of what I love, and talking to people and encouraging others. That's what advocacy looks like for me. For others, it may be reaching out and they like to be on the streets, reaching the homeless, whatever it is, it's going to be different for all of us. So you just kind of have to find your niche where you feel your voice has the biggest impact, and don't be afraid to use it. It's about touching lives, and we're all connected.
I agree. I definitely agree. It's all about the lives that you touch. And you don't know the lives that you're touching in the moment, right? You just gotta take it on faith that you are touching someone. And even if you touch one person, that makes all the difference.
That's so true. Yes, absolutely.
Well, Elizabeth, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And if you guys want to catch up or want to hear more, please follow at rough.edges.podcast on Instagram. And I thank you for listening to this episode of Rough Edges. Thank you for listening to Rough Edges. Feel free to follow this podcast on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast or visit my blog at sarahifox.com. If you have any questions or further suggestions on how to make this podcast grow, you can email at rough.edges.podcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.